I want to talk to you today about lunging. And before we start, I want you to understand that I know there are lots of different ways to do things. I don't claim that the way I do it is the only way that should be accomplished. But what I'm going to show you is a pretty straightforward, practically, boilerplate dressage approach to lunging, and what the USDF teaches. Having said that, you have to understand that the way we lunge fits right in with the way we ride and the goals we have when we ride, and that has to do with developing their physique, making them be obedient, helping them improve their stride in terms of rhythm and elasticity, and we can talk about a bunch of other goals as we go along. Okay, before we start, I want you to notice the horse is in a regular snaffle bridle. I'm going to take the reins and put them up underneath the throat latch here so that the horse can't trip on a rein hanging down, and that's simple enough to do. You just loop it over itself a few times, slip the throat latch in through half of it, fasten it back up, and it's out of the way. I'm also using a surcingle. That's not necessary. It's easier to use one, but if you're planning to ride right afterwards, you can just as well put the saddle on, and when we get around to using side reins, you can fasten them to the girth rather than to the surcingle itself. And I'm wearing gloves. Gloves are important because you don't want to hurt yourself if the horse scoots away and pulls the line through your hands. I'm using a web lunge line, which is softer and not as abrasive as if I had a nylon one. For safety's sake, you also want to be sure you don't get the line tangled or wrapped around your hand. So I cheat, I'm old, and I make loops like this, but honestly, I'm very careful about the loops. And I never let a loop get smaller and smaller, and my fingers all came off. How embarrassing. Okay, so don't do that. That's really important. The first thing I do when I lunge a horse is teach it to move away from the whip. And I can do that from a standstill here. This is more or less a carryover from your normal groundwork, but I want to be able to tap the horse here and displace her, and then correct her with my hand, and then release her. It's a three-step process. It's like every half-hold in the universe. It's a stimulus that draws a response, a modification to the response, which is, okay, good, don't just keep running away from me, stop, listen, and then a release, that's the reward. And that's what every bit of dressage is based on, and particularly the lunging situation. It would be fair to say that if you can make the horse move comfortably away from the whip like that, lunging is a combination of yielding that way and leading this way. And as I lead and yield, I end up with something that starts to look like this. As we lunge a horse, I want to be sure that she does it on my command, that she doesn't feel the line and then go running off, pulling me around the ring. I don't want her to define the circle she's on. I want to define it. Once we get organized, I will let her be in a bigger circle than this because it doesn't stress her joints as much. But this is just so that we get started. I've never lunged this horse before. I want her to care about me. Now, if you just look at my left heel for a minute, the USDF would claim that you're supposed to pivot around your heel like this, and that keeps you exactly on the spot. I don't do it that way. I don't think you need to. I try to make myself be in a place. I line up with something there and something there, and I stay there. I don't want the horse to lunge me around the ring, taking me anywhere she wants to. This is a side rein. It's a fairly common piece of equipment that we use in dressage, particularly for lunging, much more rarely for riding. Let me pose a question. Imagine that you were on your way out to the barn, you gathered up all your equipment, and you got there and discovered you must have left one of your side reins in a heap in your driveway at home. You only have one. So the question is, which side you put it on? And the answer I hope you come to is we'll put it on the outside, because the purpose of the side rein is not to pull the horse's head to the inside. To the extent that we position the horse inside, That's the conversational talking you're doing through the contact of the rein. The way I have her fastened here, just to the inside ring of the snaffle, isn't the way I would tend to do it in real life. You've probably seen lots of pony clubbers take it through the ring, across over the pole, and fasten to the bit on the opposite side. And that is certainly a harmless approach. Except when the horse isn't listening, you're sort of jerking it around in order to get it to listen. What I do to put it through the ring and then over the horse's nose, it doesn't need to be a chain, it's just a little bit of nose pressure, and I fasten it to the opposite side of the bit. And that way, I can have a little more attention from her than I would otherwise, and yet it still doesn't create a discomfort that she has to worry about. So if you have but one side rein, we'll fasten it here so it will be approximately horizontal, and it's always wise to start fairly loose so the horse doesn't have a moment of claustrophobia. We'll put it fairly long like this. This horse knows about contact and being in a frame, so we're not particularly worried. And we'll just fasten it to the bit. Now remember, this is mostly for illustration and for those of you who are clumsy and leave your side reins in the driveway. In real life, we use both of them. Yep. So here the side rein is on quite loosely. It makes no interference. It's simply there for the horse to acclimate herself to and decide that its presence doesn't scare her or offend her. And along the way, by and by, after we've worked both directions without a side rein, and the horse has worked briefly with both of them long, then we could start to shorten it to a point that would actually be doing something useful. By the way, some people will lunge, allowing the horse to stop and either come in at you, or they can wave their fingers and have the horse turn around and go the other way. That's not particularly the dressage way. We're very interested in straightness, we're interested in square halts, and so I'm inclined to think that every transition that I make, whether it's under saddle or on the lunge line, is like a punctuation mark. So as I mentioned before, lunging is a combination of yielding and leading. And when it's happening the way it's supposed to, that puts you at the apex of a triangle, where if we think of a wedge of pie and the horse is the crust of the pie, and the line is one side of where the pie is cut and the whip is the other, I'm standing right essentially in the middle of the triangle, in line with the horse's girth or slightly behind that. So now I have put both side reins on. They're not super tight, but this gives the horse a chance to take the energy from her hindquarters and direct it somewhere, hopefully gradually over the top line and into the bit. And the more the horse offers to be round with a lengthened upper neck and a relaxed, soft lower neck, and uses herself behind, stepping well up under with her hindquarters, keeping her belly muscles active, and she starts to move in an efficient way, and a way that we would like her to carry over when she's being ridden. I want to mention that when I use the whip, it's not like a lion tamer. It's more like an extension of my right arm, and I should be able to place it rather precisely and carefully at the horse's gaskin if I want, higher on the horse's croup at the girth, and it will affect her differently one place versus the next. There's very little snapping and cracking of the whip, and there's very little of waving the whip around up in the air with it higher than the part that's in my hand. And so what I've shown you so far is the normal way we would lunge most horses, and now I want to show you an alternative that I find particularly useful, and it is essentially we're doing the same thing except we have two lines. This is related to long reining a horse. This of itself is not exactly that. It's a step on the way to one of the methods of long reining. It turns out the British and the Danish and the French and the Spanish riding school all long rein in a somewhat different way, using different arrangements of the equipment. This is the Scandinavian way, stage 1 of 3. And it's at the moment not symmetrical. It's not both lines fastened the same way. This only lets you go one direction. It doesn't let you change direction without stopping and undoing things. This is for a horse who's never done it. This horse has never done it, has it? All right, so anyway, the inside line is just from the ring of the bit to my hand. The outside line is from the ring of the bit through the outside post, and it will come across behind the withers to my hand, and I'll stand in the middle and I will lunge as I had before. So let's give that a try. I'm going to make a half circle walk, here, walk, and come back to the track. And I'm going to yield her this way. This is leg yielding. I go with her, I don't hang on her, I make half halts. Some horses that don't understand yielding from the leg under saddle and want to fight about it can learn a little bit about yielding in hand or on the long line, and it's like the light goes on in their head, and then after that it's much easier to do it when you're riding them. And one really interesting thing about working the horses from the ground in all cases is, number one, it's pretty hard to lose your temper. You're distant enough that you have to reason with them. You have no way to deal with them other than with reason. You also get to look at them and see how much they're tracking up, what muscles they're using, whether they're round or whether they're flat. Girl. And so it helps establish that tuning into each other relationship that we try so hard to create. Like when I'm grooming my horse 5 or 6 hours a day. So that's the essence of this basic work. Another time we'll go on, and after she has worked both directions, I can show you how we can connect the lines symmetrically on both sides. We should be able to change direction while still trotting. With a horse that's a little farther along, you can actually make flying changes. There are all sorts of things that we can do, but this gives you the basic sense of how dressage people in general would do the lunging and working a horse on the lines.
Long lining is a wonderful way to start a horse before you attempt to mount them, because you're already starting to establish the understanding of guiding them, of flexion, direction. You manipulate the bit a little bit, get them used to all of these things that they're going to have to know when you climb up there. You know, it's a very refining tool. Yes, I do actually long line acts, which is another form of the equestrian arts, as well as like the liberty and the work in hand, airs above the ground in hand, all of these things that made famous by the Spanish riding school in Jerez, or the Spanish riding school, of course, in Vienna. So I can, go a little bit further than regular ground driving and long lining, which we've already talked about is just very beneficial to the horse to begin with. But then you go from there, the horse already knows how to Spanish walk, so now I teach him to do that with me at his side, and it becomes an act with music and lights and pretty. But as far as the long lining is concerned, it can be quite difficult because you have two very long reins that can get caught up in your legs or around. Also, you have to get the horse adjusted to having those lines across their butt, across their back. It can happen that it gets between their legs. They don't like that very much. So, there's some things that you have to do safety-wise, and there are also different places to be. You don't want to be in strike range, kicking range. You can be directly behind them, but you can also be by their side, and you can also be very, very close to their hind end when you want to do collection. So I'll be very honest with you, this horse was long lined to begin with, but he has become basically one of the main horses for my liberty work, so he hasn't been long lined in a long time. So we'll see how that goes. It's really great for the horse. My least favorite part is that I have to walk so much. But it's part of it. You gotta stay with them. You don't want to have them drag you around. You have to stay with them and guide them. So there's times where you gotta start trotting. That I will assume that your horse is not afraid of a whip. My horses are not afraid of a whip. They cannot be afraid. They have to be able to be touched everywhere. Not a big deal. All fine. This is a guiding tool. They have to respect the whip for distance and for impulsion, but they should not be fearful of the whip in any way. The cavaletti work is fantastic for their hind end, for their backs, to get their hocks moving. You know, it's a wonderful tool. So we're gonna do a little whip work before we do lunging work, because as a child, I was not allowed to warm up my mother's 18 Lipizzan stallions at Liberty in the ring if I didn't know where that whip was supposed to go. So it was really important to learn how to handle the whip and use it properly and not accidentally hit somebody when you don't want to hit them. It's a guiding tool, so you really need to know how to manipulate it. So we're gonna do a little target practice. We used to have little styrofoam cups my mom would put on the floor or on a fence post, and I just would very gently try to knock them down or get near them. And that's sort of what we're gonna do right now. It's just a little bit of a target practice.
How long would it take you working on that to finally do it when you were a kid?
Can I tell you that my forearm looked like Popeye the Sailor Man? We are assuming that you've done your groundwork and that your horse is not fearful of the whip in any way, shape, or form. You should not be fearful. Once again, it is a directional tool. And I'm keeping my body basically towards his barrel, right in the middle of the horse. When I put my whip up front and ask him to slow down, I also turn my shoulder just a little bit using my body language to ask him to back away, meaning slow down. When I ask him and put the whip towards the back of the horse, you're gonna see me sort of pushing with my chest in the direction of the movement. You know, there's some exercises that can be done on a lunge line, obviously, like the voltes that I was doing, which is a smaller circle within the circle. Once again, you're turning your body towards the back of the horse, guiding him very, very gently with your hand in the direction of movement, and creating some bend and some flexion. So this again is fundamentals for when you're going to ride this horse. So I've been working with Zeus a little bit because he's going to learn how to walk on his hind legs. So we'll just see how he does. Here, good. Good boy, here. Good man.
See, most of us would like our horses to stand on the ground.
The main reason why the hunter-jumper world lunges a horse, aside from your basic breaking and training a young one, is to really try to get a little bit of the extra energy out of them, or maybe condition them back from an injury if they need some light conditioning. What we usually do is we usually make sure we do work them on both sides, only because you don't want a horse that's conditioned too much to the left and not to the right. But if you're lunging for freshness, which is predominantly what we end up doing, is you want to make sure that you're lunging a sound, fresh horse. You know, they're going to be bucking and running and playing out here, and they're also turning in a circle. I don't over lunge. In fact, we use lunging just to get the nip off of them. We don't use it as a conditioning tool in our sport. We also don't use it as a training tool as much as just get the freshness, and I do it as infrequently as possible. The reason why for me is that the big jumper horses have enough torque on their joints and their bones, and they don't need any extra torque going around in a circle. You know, and we just use it mainly to prep them for the show ring, get them a little quiet, get them listening to you, and then once Lily is listening like this and she has a nice calm, kind eye, then I know that I can get on her, and she's probably paying a little bit more attention to me at this point, rather than paying attention to her being fresh and just wanting to buck and play. And that's the main difference. I know that dressage disciplines and other disciplines use it for conditioning, maybe a lunge in lieu of a ride training technique, whereas typically we just use it to get the freshness out.
Put her in the round pen. What I'm doing, any horse I put in the round pen, what I'm doing is I'm putting them in there and giving them an opportunity to tell me who they are. Just as important as the expectation of physical talent is understanding how the horse perceives life, how the horse perceives who I am in their life. This is a herd animal. She may look at me as another herd member. She may look at me as a predator. What she showed me today was an independent streak, not totally belligerent, but definitely questioning my authority. You're headed that direction. I said stop there with my body. You didn't do it. So I am going to either A, step in front of you and enforce the stop, or B, I'm going to move you forward, and if you choose not to stop, I'm just going to make you keep going. Said, who are you? Which she did. I mean, she demonstrated that rather nicely. She turned in and looked at me and went, oh, I guess you're in charge of my feet. I need to train her mind to accept me as her leader. And horses are great because they usually will be very honest and allow that.